Gabrielius Landsbergis is the former Foreign Minister of Lithuania. Since leaving that post, he's become a sought after geopolitical analyst who can be seen at international conferences and on podcasts and streaming services virtually every day on the internet. I learned recently that he is a visiting fellow at Stanford for 1 year. He's been on the No Delusion Zone before, and I'm very glad to have him back because he is one of, if not the most honest and plain spoken elected officials I've ever spoken with. Why he doesn't get into more trouble, I don't know, but I'm really glad to have him back here. Gabrielius, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's good to be back.
And I meant what I said. I mean, even when you were still in office, I mean, you spoke your mind. And that really is rare. I speak to elected officials, of course, at various levels of government in different countries. And wow, you really have to put a gun to their head to get them to just answer anything, with a straight answer. But you don't ever seem to be afraid of that. And I really appreciate that. So we're going to get right into it. I'm going to allow you to get into trouble right off the bat and talk about the EU, NATO too, the EU and NATO, and the hybrid warfare, which has been going on for years, but of course is ratcheting up a lot in the last few months. Not just, I'll just mention, of course, arson, murder, drone warfare, cyber warfare, the MiG incursions into NATO airspace, and of course, plain old espionage. The list goes on, and it's worse now than ever. I have very strong feelings about what NATO and the EU is and is not doing in response to that. What's your response about the NATO and EU response to the hybrid warfare that is going on right now, every day in Europe?
Well, that's a good question. You were very right by saying that it started way way longer, much longer than the events that we're seeing now. The first time that we've been informed, I was a minister, that we've been informed by intelligence services that the events that we're seeing in the news are not merely an incident that some a teenager or just a random person would do, but it's an operation organized by Russian military intelligence. I think it was 2022 when the first time in Lithuania, I think it was a monument in one of the tiny towns in Lithuania was painted over with green and red paint. It was a monument dedicated to a national freedom fighter, who was coming from that location, to commemorate him and his fight for, against the Soviets. It seemed very random, like what is happening now? But apparently that was a test to see how institutions would work, how the politicians would, deal with the situation, because the evidence that this was Russians was very clear, and it went up from there. So since 2022, you mentioned we had an arson attempt, then we had an attempt to bring in um, explosive devices into airplanes, ship them over to United States, Canada, and get them to explode either in air or in some other dangerous circumstances. We had cable cutting. We had so many events that basically now it's even difficult to remember all of them. Most of them have been proven to be Russian special operations. I've always argued since 2 years back, I've argued that we need to push back on this. We cannot always stay just on defensive or just with a political rhetorics, because from Russian perspective, it will be read as an invitation. That means that Russians will escalate. And now you've mentioned again, yet drones in Poland, MiGs in Estonia, drones in Denmark, Sweden, Norway. We've just a couple of days ago, we had Vilnius airport was closed because of balloons, which is a different sort of a, vehicle, air vehicle that disrupted the work of airport. So this is a clear escalation, and it is happening because for 2 years, for more than 2 years, we've allowed Russians to ramp up their efforts.
Why?
Well, number of things. First of all, we're afraid of escalation. That is probably what is officially said. But there's another version. Recently, and I'm flabbergasted by this. I was told by one of the expert, the security expert that I keep contact with, that he said that, look, it's understandable why Russians are now escalating with drones because Ukrainians hit some important factory in Russia, and that is Russian response. And I mean, why I was so surprised was that if this thinking goes deeper than a single person, it kind of allows Russia kind of reasonable escalation so that we allow ourselves to explain what could be Russia's motive and normalize it as if it is normal. While on the other hand, we would say, Russia is reaping what it's sown, right? So Ukrainians have a right to defend, and Russia has no right to escalate it in NATO territory. So we need to push back. But we somehow, through expertise, through our own, thinking, we've allowed this space. Like, well, I mean, it's probably normal, and it's so far from normal. But this thinking allows Russia to do what it does.
Well, it's insane. I mean, I have been shouting for years too, literally in the voice that I have, that this is crazy. And I know for a fact from the people I speak to and also with my background that the military and intelligence and security leaders in NATO and the EU know exactly what's going on. And they're having nightmares. They don't sleep very well, and they haven't for years. But it's the civilian leadership that's pushing back at this. And as you know, there's a whole host of reasons for that. Me personally, I happen to put cowardice at the top of the list. Sorry, and I get blowback about that. But when Russia has done what they've done in Ukraine for, well, 11 years, but certainly over the last 3+ years, the immense amount of war crimes they have committed and come out blatantly and said, we are at war with the West. We're at war with the West. And the fact that Europe, the vast majority of Europeans outside, say, the Eastern nations, don't get that. The leaders, again, the civilian leadership, are not telling the truth to their civilian population, to me, is just absolutely disgusting. It's not unbelievable. I believe it because they're cowards. A lot of them, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gabrielius, have business ties in Russia, some of the very top leaders, and they don't want to jeopardize that. Just like the, I don't know, 200 plus Western international corporations that are still doing business in Russia. So let me ask you, and I'll get you in trouble again. How much of this is cowardice? How much of this is just rank stupidity? I'm talking about the civilian leadership, or naivete. Do we need to put that all together as to why so many Western European leaders are not getting it yet, that they're not putting their defense industry, for example, on a wartime footing, and are even, like you said, believing some of the hogwash that the Kremlin's putting out, justifying their actions?
I think that what you're mentioning about the interests, the commercial interests. I don't think that they're there, at least not at the level definitely that has been in shorter times. So most most of the political ties, like actual ties, are severed. So what we see, Hungarian leadership going to Moscow or Slovakian leadership going to Moscow, and it's shocking, really. But I mean, no other, respected leader would do that. So I believe that it's most likely. I wouldn't say that this is one of the main reasons now for what we're seeing. I think that the probably at the core of it is big part of a wishful thinking that we can somehow it will all just go away. You
But isn't
know,
there naivete?
Yeah, in that's the war is happening 3.5 years, right? So Europe is still not at war technically, right? So we are not, our troops are not dying, we're not defending our borders yet. Ukrainians have not lost yet, so so who knows? Maybe all of these things will go away. I mean, one of the most one of the best examples, and I'm speaking honestly. I mean, it's no joke. In the whole, European environment is Germany, right? I mean, their plan to spend €500 billion, this is nothing to be frowned at, right? So it's an enormous investment into German and also European security. So it's serious. But if you look at how the money is supposed to be distributed, so it has this fat tail. So they're spending the least amount today, and it's supposedly to go up, reaching its full potential in 5 years. So extremely skeptical people would say that this is German government hoping that the war will be over in less than 5 years, and they will not need to spend this fat end of the deal. Um,
Well, absolutely. I mean, but isn't that really the crux of the whole problem? A lot of really fiery words and finger wagging and even appropriating vast sums of money in the future. We'll get to it, and we're going to appropriate this, but we have other priorities right now, and we're going to dole this out little by little. And like you said, hopefully in 5 years this will all pass. This to me seems to be the problem since from the very beginning. And I think what proves this, that they don't get it and they're not willing to put their money where their mouth is, and you just did recently a podcast on this, I believe. The damn money sitting in Brussels, the almost 200 billion euros, which is over 200 billion dollars, which is sitting there. And the Belgian prime minister just came out and said why they can't do it, because Putin threatened me. He said very bad things, and I can't let the money go. And yes, I'm making fun of him because I believe he's a coward. If this money was actually seized, not just frozen, but seized by the EU and given to NATO all at once, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
yeah, I mean the conversation would be very different. I mean, it's
Yes.
an enormous amount of money. It's an enormous amount of money that would make, so much difference that it's difficult even to comprehend. I believe that the reason about the money is, and I'm being told as well that Europe is a harbor for many countries. So Russia is not, it's not just one country keeping its money in Europe. And there are quite cynical people in the leadership of Europe who think that if we confiscate, or I mean, even if not confiscate, but I mean, even if we create a mechanism which would allow Ukrainians to use the frozen assets, that would scare other dictators away.
Well, that would be too bad, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's horrible.
What a horrible situation. An
Yeah.
outcome. I can understand their point.
Yeah. So that means that, but in turn, that means that we are encouraging other dictators to plan ahead, right? So they know where we are. We're not creating any ambiguity where we would say, okay, fine. I mean, if you cross the line, we might be forced to do certain things, right? I mean, think China, right? But we are creating a different type of, we are creating an encouragement system where we would say, if you attack Taiwan, you'll be fine. Your money will be fine.
Well, it's the old Swiss banking excuse. I mean, they said the same thing until they were forced, at
Yeah.
least, to give some of their secrets up when so many criminal syndicates were exposed as having their bank accounts there. Again, I'm appalled. I watched the speech by the Belgian prime minister, and I actually make a podcast about it. And I was, told that I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm an idiot, delusional, blah blah blah. No, I'm not. He's a coward, and he's said exactly what you said, but what all the majority of the Western leadership have said since the very beginning, that Putin has threatened Europe many times with nukes, as well as, well, mostly Medvedev has done this, but threatened the West with nukes. So, my God, we can't cross that line because he may do something. And they've been saying that for 3.5 years while Ukraine bleeds and dies.
Yeah.
And hiding behind lawyers, which is what it is. The lawyers, the legalities of not seizing the frozen Russian assets is just appalling to me. I'm sorry, I can't rationalize it in my mind.
Yeah, and now there's a mechanism that has been proposed that I think, it would work quite well. Basically, it would leverage the amount that is frozen, allowing Europe to borrow exactly the same amount, give it to Ukraine, and the deal would be in a way so that Ukraine would only be forced to repay the debt only after the peace settlement and after the reparations.
At no interest, right? I read that.
Yeah, but I mean, basically, it would force. So, if it is part of reparations, that means that Russians would be repaying their own debt.
Right. Right. So
So this
obviously
is,
they are not supporting that plan.
yeah, no, of course not. But I mean, it's not worst. It's not worst idea. Not the worst idea.
No, not at
Yeah,
all. Look, Ukraine needs to get that money. The fact that it's not
exactly.
there yet, I mean, they could dole this out, apportion it, reproportion it, work out any number of schemes, but give it to Ukraine and
Yeah,
then let Europe work out how that's going to be repaid. I mean, if it was their country, if Berlin was getting bombed again like it was in 1944 and 45, I think they'd seize that money pretty quick. But
yeah,
it's not them yet.
yeah.
And that's what's really, really maddening about all of this. Um, I'm going to ask an obvious question, but it's still being asked in the media and in certain countries. Do you have any doubt whatsoever that all of the drone incursions and, as you said, balloons and the cable cutting and all that is the result or actions of Russia?
Yeah,
You have
of
no doubt.
course. Yeah, absolutely no doubt. I
Um,
mean,
no, go ahead, please. It's
no, no. I mean, it's
debated in the media. There are several political leaders that are saying, "Well, we haven't, we don't have conclusive proof yet." That's the phrase.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's in some cases, I'm thinking that the leaders who are saying this, it's as if they are preparing for a court battle in the state of New York or something like that.
Amen. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Again,
mean,
hiding behind legalese
yeah, it's not that. It's you're not about to fight this off in the court.
with a subpoena. I agree.
Yeah,
I mean, you
it's
know,
military. It's war, and even with naming, I've criticized this, and I was criticized as well in return. And I said, why do we call it hybrid? Like what it is? Like it's a mix hybrid, right? So it's a mixture. It's a mix of war and not war. And so it provides us an opportunity then to say, well, because if it's a mix of both war and not war, then our answer could be something, as an answer to a war act and also not. And then we have a chance to choose that, well, maybe this was not war. Maybe this is something else. We don't know what to call it. And that's why we're not going to give an answer.
correct. I mean, as
Uh,
you know, all of NATO, and I'm going to get to this point right after this, all of NATO so far in the EU have not come to a consensus decision even to shoot down drones and or MiGs or any violation of their airspace. Yes, they've said that they will, or we might. We're closely monitoring it, and we have new safeguards. But as a whole, they've not said any violation of our airspace will result in the immediate shooting down of the violators. They haven't come to that consensus yet, which again is just a little amazing to me because they're obviously not. They haven't decided that they're at war, and they won't even admit publicly that these are coming from Russia, or that at least they're controlled by Russian assets.
yeah. Yeah, I remember when there was a balloon incident, a China air balloon incident in United States.
Yes, yes.
Imagine if that would have gone to NATO channels,
Mm.
and you would still have an ongoing investigation. Belgians or Spanish would disagree with the
Well,
with the
Gabrielius, if
balloons.
you remember, though, that particular incident, it took us 3 days to shoot it down. It went from the Pacific. I think it was eventually shot down over the East Coast of the Midwest.
And the president was criticized then.
Yes, for shooting it
Yeah,
down.
yeah, yeah.
I
But I mean, it was taken care of,
Yes, it
right?
was. It
And
was. It
then
was.
yeah,
If it was no, if it was
so
NATO now, yeah, or the EU, it'd still be.
yeah. So my point is that if we need to toughen our backs, we need to see the way that United States handles its national security, right? So if there is an unidentified object, very likely from an unfriendly country, well, you take it down. And that's basically it, right? There is no that's how it should be. I mean, very little surprise to me that this happened in the way it happened, and then again, in turn, there is a big surprise why we cannot handle it the same way in Europe.
Well, that leads me into my next question, and I think it's a really important point. Again, having served as the foreign minister of Lithuania, what are the mechanisms for changing the requirements of a majority of NATO members to decide almost any action? There's got to be a way that they can develop new policies or dust off old existing policies. So when something like this happens, or when an Orban and Fico block aid to Ukraine. They don't need either unanimity or even the majority. What is the mechanism within both the EU and NATO for getting around those stumbling blocks?
Well, when it comes to NATO, I believe that we are on the verge of some sort of a reconfiguration. I think that we will see more of that. Look, when drones entered Polish airspace, and now we like to brag that, oh, there was a NATO operation. It wasn't a NATO operation. Basically, what happened, Poles assembled a coalition of the willing, which consisted of Italians, Dutch, Swedes, and Poles. So these countries had their airplanes in Poland, and they decided to join in. So it did not go through Washington. It did not go through Brussels. It did not go through, the official channels of the ambassadors meeting and voting. It was assembled ad hoc, and it worked out, right? Not ideally, but with the instruments that were at hand, it worked probably the best that you could imagine, right? So, well, a fifth of the drones were taken down. Um, you know, I mean, it showed that there is some response, at least lethality, at least when it comes to, drone incursions. Um, if it would have gone to NATO proper, probably we would be seeing again the same thing. Somebody would have vetoed it. Somebody would have doubted it. Somebody would have, raised questions, and most likely polls would be on their own. So this, kind of starts giving the leaders an idea that in the future, if we want a fast reaction, we have to, create these bubbles of security, or defense, where, three, four, five countries that, that are in the neighborhood that, are able, have the capacity, would deal with these problems. It remains to be seen where the US will be on this, because at least my experience has always been that US wants us to go to NATO through NATO channels, most likely because they have, kind of a lot of control, and it's a more systematic way how to approach things, lowering tensions and trying to remain in control. But it appears that it's no longer working. I mean, the dangers are just too acute, and the countries will be seeking for decisions faster. Now, when it comes to EU, that's a very different ballgame. Um, I've always argued that we should have taken steps in order to isolate Orban and Fico, practically, not just politically, in our speeches but basically in a decision-making process. There is a process. It's a very difficult one. It's called Article 7 in European Treaty that allows, if completed successfully, it allows to remove a veto right from a country. So that the country cannot vote any longer. It's forced to accept the decisions, but it cannot be part of decision-making process. Why it's difficult? Because it requires multiple votes, and it also requires so that every 26 countries need to agree on this. And I've always pushed for urgency because the more friends Orban would have in European Union, the more difficult it would be to make this decision. So if he's alone, you can isolate him. If he has Fico, that means that Fico's veto would save Orban. Now, after the Czech election, it looks like Orban will have one more friend in the region, and that makes isolation even more difficult.
What? So the votes aren't even there right now to do that, to use this Article 7, in your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, if I've argued that if it's just Slovakia that is helping Orban, at least in theory, it is possible to try to separate them. Slovakia is a smaller partner in this grouping of Hungary and Slovakia, and European Commission has leverage on Slovakia, so to kind of to split them apart. Now with Czechia joining in, so you have a three-country grouping, anti EU, basically pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian, which will definitely support each other. So the further it goes, the more difficult, to do anything about it will get.
It's amazing that, basically having two apparatchiks in EU has been allowed to remain this long, especially after the full invasion of Ukraine in 2022. I mean, the EU and NATO, they operate at glacial speed. I mean, and so many have died. It's been so bad over the last 3, 4 years, 11 years, really. Let me ask something closer to home. What would you have done, or at least advocated, if you were still the foreign minister, with the all of the shadow fleets operating in and around the Baltics, and obviously cutting cables? What would you have advocated, and what can be done now to stop that? I mean, my God, they've got the navies in plural in that area to interdict pretty much any of the ships that they want. They could shut down the shadow fleet. Why isn't that happening?
The most practical way to do that is so what is Shadow Fleet? Basically, Shadow Fleet is a fleet of ships that Russia uses to avoid what is called the price ceiling. Basically, the G7 countries, together with the EU, decided that the oil can be sold at a cap, right? No, the price cannot be higher than a certain amount of dollars. So in what it does, that the countries are still, I mean, India can purchase. I mean, if America says that the country has to, that the oil cap, Russian oil cap is 40, India is buying it for 60. So it's basically, breaking the cap, but they said, well, we did not sign up to this. It's our, it's between us and then Russia. But there's a catch. Any insurance company that insures the fleet also has to adhere to the oil cap, to the price cap. So then not in London, Paris, Frankfurt, wherever, no insurance company can insure a fleet if they're about to sell oil higher than the cap.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So what Russians are doing, then they basically are not insuring those ships and the oil in them. So they don't have any environmental protection, no insurance, nothing. And this is what makes them, shadow. So
Those are
they're
violations of international maritime law. Am I not correct?
exactly, exactly. So this is, having a ship full of oil going with it to India, in effect, it's not illegal, but having an uninsured and dangerous ship, that's what makes it illegal. How Russians are avoiding this is that they are, taking the ships through international waters where you basically cannot control them unless you figure out the way. So a long path would be to kind of to go through UN to ensure that okay, they're breaking, UN regulations, what is basically, years and years most likely impossible. But they are using a tiny gap to get out of the Baltic Sea through Denmark, where they are crossing Danish waters or Danish controlled waters. And Danes have been asking for a very long time to support them if they would do something about this, because they can start stopping the ships and asking for documentation and not allowing them if the ships don't have it. And we
The,
know that they
the
don't
Danes
have
are asking who? NATO for
NATO.
support?
Yeah, they don't want to do it alone. And I
Sure.
understand that Denmark is not a big country
Mhm.
with a very big responsibility of guarding what is called Kattegat, the gates of
Yes.
gates to from Baltic to Atlantic.
Also, the capital of the Viking Empire in the TV series. Great.
Yes, also, yeah, yeah, funny,
Kattegat.
funny, yeah.
Well, listen, but seriously, why? Okay, I understand all of that. Why doesn't not Lithuania, but why doesn't Finland and Sweden, both of which have pretty decent navies, why don't they back up Denmark and say the heck with the NATO with NATO? If they get around to approving this, great, we're going to back you up right now.
Well, probably because still no country believes that they should be alone in this. I mean, even in these groupings, right? So most likely they want either Brits or French or Brits and French or best, United States to be backing them.
And well, that's my next point. The Brits, of course, have a navy.
Yeah.
All of them do. Why don't they say, okay, NATO, when you get around to it in the UN, we know it's going to take you several years, but this is a huge ongoing problem. We're going to back up Denmark right now. It's the same problem that we just discussed about NATO in with the drones, and coming to any decisive action, any consensus at all. They need to make smaller groups outside of the larger framework in order to do this. And it's just beyond me why this is taking so many years to finalize those smaller groupings and take action.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the answer probably is, as you mentioned as well, is the same as we spoke about the drones. So it's that, the smaller countries on the eastern flank or in the northern Europe, they don't believe that they alone can do it, even within the grouping, that they don't feel strong enough, to take on this agenda. Um, and yeah, and the big countries, well, they have different agenda, different worldview, either not awakening yet, either naivete or fear or whatever. I mean, it's difficult to explain it clearly. I mean, to understand that clearly, what is happening there. I've just seen the announcement. I have not read it through from Denmark that they will be taking a tougher stance on checking the ships that pass through their waters. So I think that Russians themselves crossed a certain line in Denmark by, attacks on the airports and, so many drone sightings, which have been orchestrated also from the same ships, right? So Russians are inventive. They're not about just to ship to export oil in those ships, but now they pack them with drones. They organize drone operations. They do cable cutting from the same ship. So it's becoming worse.
Well, those same ships, some of them, as you know, are cutting cables. This doesn't just affect Denmark. This affects everyone. It affects many, many countries. And the fact that this is happening and the countries aren't banding together now and say we've got to stop at least that, the cable cutting, again, is way beyond me. As you know, the Munich airport was closed, at least briefly. So this is not just Denmark, of course. It's affecting all of the countries. And I don't know. It's crazy to me that the fact that they haven't been able to come to a consensus. Do you know from your experience, Gabrielius, if the foreign ministers or the defense ministers of the smaller countries, Eastern flank, Baltic, and so forth, have and are getting together with the larger countries and begging them, or not begging them, but asking them to do this, to band together with them, at least one or two of them, to form these small groups? Are these ongoing discussions, or has it happened and the Western countries have just rebuffed them and said not interested?
Yeah, I mean, I've addressed NATO ministerial meetings number of times as a minister, saying that we need to take a tougher stance. And I've advocated not just for a defensive action, but also, figuring out the potential offensive action. There are ways how can you basically, because what we're seeing now tells us that our deterrent has failed. Russians are no longer afraid, because 5 years ago, launching drone against, Poland would have seen an enormous escalation that would probably merit an answer. So Russians would not do it. And now Russians are doing it. And the only reason why, or one of the reasons why, is because they know that we don't, we're not prepared to answer them. That means that there is no price tag for Putin for doing that. He's free. It's for free.
Where do you see Putin pushing this a lot more in the near future? I mean, he's going to keep doing it. There's no question. He's going to keep probing, and he's going to keep increasing his probes to gauge NATO's response. Do you see any more drastic action other than what that's drastic now? But I mean, the drones and the MiG violations. Do you hear or project that there's going to be something even far more serious in the next few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. One of the goals that he might have is not just to intimidate the Western publics, but also, as I mentioned, the expert, who was very understanding to why Putin is forced, quote unquote, to behave like he does with the drones and balloons and cable cuttings and whatnot, is that Putin can start expecting that European countries might start raising pressure on Ukraine. I'm sure that there are leaders who would go to Kiev and they would say, um, if you guys, you need to stop with those oil rigs and oil refineries because, we get the drones, we feel bad. Maybe it's possible to make an arrangement. I mean, it sounds crazy, but knowing the mentality of certain European countries, I wouldn't be totally surprised that that could be happening, or at least that Putin could be expecting this to happen.
Oh, I wouldn't either, especially since the Americans have pretty much pulled out of any ongoing support. Yes, President Trump has said he's going to supply Tomahawks. We shall see. He's also said that he's going to be supplying, continuing to supply or share intelligence to target Russia. That the Ukrainians can use that. We shall see. Everything's a we shall see. But essentially, America's pulled out of the. You were recently in Ukraine a few weeks ago, Kiev, and I actually saw an interview. What would you say is the feeling, the attitude, the morale of the Ukrainians in general right now? Has it changed since you were there before? Is it the same, or is it better or worse? What would you say?
Um, there's more belief in themselves. I mean, I've seen much less dependence on Western support. But I mean, the way that it's, kind of many times in the past, when I would go visit Ukraine, I would get, a list of things that I needed. Right, we need this, we need equipment, we need this and that, please do support us, please help us out. And that was, I've always tried to assist in any way I could. And now it seems it's changing. There's much more, that, oh, we can do this on our own. We're ramping up, we're producing more, we're getting stronger. So it's admirable, in a way. But in turn, I think that there are countries who, even US, I would say that it should start feeling that there is much less leverage on Ukraine that has been ever in the past. So President, Biden could have said, "Oh, if you attack the oil refiners, we will stop supporting you. You will not get another tranche and blah blah blah." Now, I mean, we don't even have a moral right. We never had a moral right to ask them not to do anything that they believe is necessary. But now people lost even practical ability to do that. Ukrainians are choosing the targets. They are choosing how often, which ones, and what they're going to do about it. It can be a bit worrying to Russians, I hope, and it's a good thing.
Well, you're confirming what I have been told as well through the people I talk with in Ukraine, as well as what I read. The feeling, the morale is much more positive because of what you said. They are depending much less on certainly America, But to, another a lesser extent on Europe as well, they are certainly counting on Europe backing them up and supplying more in the future, in the near future. But as for now, they have become far more self-sufficient in every way, from ammunition to drone creation, innovation, targeting, and all of that. One of which, and I've talked about this recently, is the development of their first ballistic missile, the Flamingo, which is basically a drone on steroids and can easily reach Moscow and beyond with a about 10 times the payload of the biggest drone, which will cause Putin real headaches. They just need to produce that in numbers, which they will do in the near future. So yeah, I mean, we don't have the leverage, certainly the United States anymore. And I am really just again proud of the Ukrainians for what they're doing. They're even offering, as you know, their expertise to Europe
Yeah.
in terms of drone warfare and cyber warfare, which is just, unbelievable. I'll leave it with this last question, Gabrielius. I ask you this all the time. I ask everyone that's been there and is really focused on this. We're already into October. So, where do you see the war in Ukraine at the end of this year, which is only 3 short months away?
My the two bets that I would be, thinking of. One is an increased Chinese assistance to Russia. The more pressure Ukrainians will ramp up on Ukraine, the more involved China will get, and clearly that is what is going to happen. I bet that this will going to happen. And the second bet is more Russian pressure on European countries. So more drone incursions, more escalation, in order to have Putin might have a goal to expand the war. If he feels that he's losing, he will try to expand this. And for that is needed that Europeans would bring up pressure, ramp up pressure on Russia, so that we are not the soft underbelly of the defensive war, and that we ramp up pressure on China, to make it for them much more costly to support Russia than it is now. Both things are within our reach. Both things are possible. Don't require a lot of it doesn't get us into the war that the people are trying to avoid, but it would help Ukraine and corner Russia.
Gabrielius Landsbergis, former Foreign Minister of Lithuania. Thank you so much again for joining me on the No Delusion Zone. You take care.
Thank you so much.